Good morning, guys, from a wet Costa Rica this morning. It's not often we get wet mornings here. Well, recently, actually, it's been a it's been a theme here. Last week was pretty wet as we saw a low pressure front move in. But anyway, enough about the weather. Today, we're going to be talking with JP Ortiz. He's someone who contacted me through the podcast about his property in the Osa Peninsula he wanted to get my kind of opinion on what he should do with it based on some of the trends and advice that I actually, look at because we are one of the owners also of vacationscostarica.com, Costa Rica's largest luxury travel company, as well as centralamerica.com as well. So we get quite a bit of interesting data there, kind of crossing lifestyle, real estate, and also vacations. So he's looking to develop his property down there in South, but I thought it'd be a great idea to get him on the podcast so he can kind of explain his journey and also the process he went through to buy the land, just because I know as inventory is starting to shrink, as a lot of the realtors are saying, a lot of people are looking at buying land and also building. So I thought it's really interesting to get him on so we could run through that process of buying the land and also to get an idea of what he's trying to do with it. Remember, if you have any questions for JP, all of his contact details will be in the description. And if you would like to see any future guests or for me to cover any other themes, our email has changed. It's info@investingcostarica.com. That's info@investingcostarica.com. It's a website we're developing at the moment to kind of bring you guys basically the raw and real news about investing here in Costa Rica. Anyway, let's get straight into it. Good morning, JB. How you doing?
I'm good, man. Thanks. Great to see you.
Yeah, so I just gave the intro, and I mean, basically, it's a bit of a wet day here in Costa Rica, but I'm hoping that it's gonna sunny up. The sun's gonna come out a bit later on.
Yeah, it sounds like a wet one right now. We're going down in a couple of weeks for whale watching, so we'll see you down there shortly.
Yeah, it'll be great. I mean, the whale watching season here, which typically runs August, September, all the way through to November, down in the southern zone, is a beautiful time of year. Last year, I saw humpback whales with my wife. It's the one thing she'd been wanting to do for years, so I thought I should take her. So
I think our wives would be friends. That's what we've been trying to do for the better part of a decade, and just haven't had much luck.
Well, it was actually in the southern, in the Golfe Dulce there, the little kind of, I suppose, the Bay Area down there by the Osa Peninsula. We actually saw it in. We stayed at Playa Cativo Lodge. Had the pleasure of staying there, and it was absolutely amazing. But you're based in Atlanta. You got your Costa Rica shirt on today. It's summertime up there, of course. And if I'm correct. If I'm correct, you've been coming to Costa Rica for over 10 years, right?
Yeah, just about 10 years. So my wife and I was telling you earlier, we did the interbus thing. So it's kind of one of the ways that people visit the country the first time, and you hire a bus and they take you around to a couple different locations. And so we did La Fortuna, which is where Arenal volcano is. Really beautiful site. A lot of people like to go there. Went up to Monteverde, which is a cloud forest. And it's a coffee growing region. So also really cool. It's kind of like the rainforest, but more at the Midlands level. And then visited Manuel Antonio, where we ended up getting married later in 2017. So it was a really beautiful spot.
Well, you and I got together because we were just, I think that you'd been listening to the podcast and my craziness that I do and kind of wanted to reach out. And I was interested in your story of buying the land that you just bought. And I think we'll get into that in a little bit. But I mean, if you don't mind me asking, why did you decide to buy in Costa Rica to begin with and like make an investment in Costa Rica, and why so south?
Yeah, no, good questions both. So that first trip I told you about, we took back in 2012, we went down to Manuel Antonio, and one of the first things I did was start noticing that there was the big brand name realtors down there, so Coldwell Banker, Remax, et cetera. And so one of the days that we were on our trip, I just called up some guys and said, hey, can we get out and go look at some land, and you just mind driving us around? And thankfully they took us out for the day, had a blast, and drove through rivers, got to kind of get the real feel for what it's like in Costa Rica. And it was all still, I mean, this is 10 years ago, so it wasn't very developed down there yet. And Manuel Antonio is now a very popular place for people to buy homes and develop and go on vacation. And so as we started to look, we just got to know the country better and really fell in love with the Osa Peninsula in particular, more for the biodiversity. So it's one of the most biodiverse places on the planet. About 2.5% of the world's biodiversity is just located in that part of the world. And then it's also pristine habitats and just close to a lot of wildlife and cool things to see. So no regrets about buying down in that area. And our property is about an hour and a half south of Manuel Antonio.
Okay. Well, it's funny that you say the biodiversity, because I remember the first time I went to the Osa Peninsula, I stayed at La Rios Eco Lodge. I saw more wildlife there in like one day than I saw in like 3 years of, traveling, through the northern parts of Costa Rica. I mean, it really is a biodiverse area.
That's true, and I think right now you've got a lot of interest, and you've talked to a lot of guys, and I've got some friends who run the Peninsula, and that's much more like California, very dry, beautiful part of the country, great waves and beaches, but not as many animals and cool biodiverse things to see. So just anytime you get further south, closer to the rainforest and the jungles of Costa Rica, you could see more and more.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. So Costa Rica is the more south you go, the more rainforest you get. But also it gets a little wetter in some parts of the year because it is called a rainforest. But it's always green. It's always green. The northern part of the country, December all the way through to April is very brown. Well, it's just brown. There is no green. So
Yeah. Yeah, the dry season's nice, and that's part of our story. And I can tell you what we ended up buying and how we got there. But we came down in March this year, so it was COVID. Everything had been locked down. We hadn't been in Costa Rica. I think it was like 6, 7 months, maybe before, almost a year, I guess, since the pandemic. And so we headed down and just had the original plan to start thinking about buying something down there. We had some cash savings, and some other things that had kind of worked out where we were able to make this investment. And I'm sort of doing things in reverse order. I'm buying the vacation rental property first. I actually still rent an apartment back in the US. So it's sort of funny, but I knew that prices would only go up in real estate. I knew that I wanted to buy in Costa Rica at some point. And so we ended up connecting with some mentors of ours. You mentioned the Lapa Rios Lodge, but there's another place down in Drake Bay, the Drake Bay Getaway. Some friends of mine run that, Patrick and Jens, and they've really just kind of been great resources for us to guide us through the process. And so that inspired us to think, okay, we can do this. We just need to have good people on the ground, good lawyers, folks who know what they're doing, and that sort of helped guide us through the purchase process.
So tell us what you ended up buying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's 13 acres of land. Most of it is under what's called a zona agricola. Basically, it's like farm, just like untouchable land. You don't want to be able to develop it that much, but that's what we were looking for. So we want to essentially do more of a small footprint type development, smaller homes. And our first idea is to do a vacation rental property / home just for us. So that's the focus right now. We like the area. We know we like being down there. It's about 15 minutes from the beach. The area itself and the town is called San Buenas. And so it's close to Ciudad Cortez and then about 15-20 minutes south of Ojochal, which most people know in the Bahia Baiana area. But 15 minutes to beaches, great valley views. Like I said, it's 13 acres. There's water bordering the property. So it's a natural creek that is really wonderful. And I've been able to hike down there. And so right now it's just about how can we cultivate this land, make sure that we kind of plant the trees, everything that we want going with it. We've got time we can take with it. And then we're starting to talk to contractors and builders now, just about some ideation of what we want to actually put out there.
Awesome. It sounds like an interesting project you've got on your hands there. So I know you and I had spoken a little bit about, how do you have kind of vacation rentals with hotel amenities? Because that kind of is being smashed together, as you can see by the Marriott building, built. When the Marriott's running after condos, that that vacation rentals and hotel amenities are getting closer together.
That was the other piece of insight when we were down there vacationing, and I started to just get questions from friends of mine that were reaching out and saying, "Hey, I know you've been to Costa Rica a lot. We're thinking about long-term renting down there." And these are people who have a good amount of money. They work in tech or they work in other industries that pay decently, but they have the flexibility of remote work. And so when I started to put two and two together, and we've been talking about that, and I've seen this trend, just I think more and more folks are going to spend time, 2-3 weeks on vacation or a month if they can afford it, to just be in a location where you don't have to worry about everything, and you can stay put. And it's I think fewer people too is one of the benefits that Costa Rica brings, and particularly that part of the country.
Yeah, again, the Costa Rica's population is 5 million, and the majority of people are here in the Central Valley. So the rest of the country is pretty, it's not that inhabited, which is kind of nice. That Costa Rica is like that. And, if you take a boat out on the ocean here and look back, you don't see much either.
It's pretty spaced out. Yeah. And we've done that too. And that's part of the great things is being able to get out and go look at the wildlife. We did this awesome dolphin tour. Just hired a couple guys, and it's typically a fishing boat, and I caught some tuna fish and saw thousands of bottlenose dolphins out there in the Osa Peninsula. So you just can't see things like this in most places.
Well, let's get into the nuts and bolts of buying the land. Run us through how that process went, what surprised you. And I'll ask you a bit later about, what advice that you would give to people. Maybe just run us through that process. Like, did you use escrow? Did you not? Were you buying from a local? Were you buying from a foreigner? I think listeners would be very interested in knowing that.
Yeah. So the first step was I kind of mentioned we talked to lawyers, and they just advised based on what we wanted to do, which is eventually like monetize this space and bring income in, is to develop an SRL, which is basically the LLC equivalent in Costa Rica. So it's Sociedad Responsabilidad Limitada. But we can put some resources in there, and I had great attorneys. Zurcher Odio, a Raven out of San Jose, and that's typically where you see most of the good attorneys kind of functioning in the country. And so Priscilla and Mauricio, our attorneys, they guided us through the process. It was more or less like start the paperwork. All in, I want to say, because I think that was a question you had, maybe 5 to 8 grand, just depended on like when we were paying, and we've been doing this a little bit over a set period of time.
Yep.
For attorney's fees, over the time of buying the land. And then we ended up connecting with a few different realtors. We were just kind of shopping around. I didn't want to go straight through, let me just go find a piece of land and talk to a local. I'm bilingual in Spanish, so that's something I could have done, but you have to be careful because there's titled land versus untitled land. If you get into untitled land mess, you can just find yourself not really owning it.
Yep.
And there's these deals fall apart all the time, and people kind of lose their money that way.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing that you say that, because it's kind of like a derecho where you have right to use the land, but in order to get it titled, in the National Registry, you have to go around all your neighbors, and for them to basically all agree that you own the land. It's a bit of a nightmare, to be honest.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And so we learned that lesson from our friends Patrick and Jens. They own land in Drake Bay, and there's not much titled land there, basically. And so they said, hey, keep an eye out for that. Keep an eye out for the other two things if you're thinking about buying in the country, is water and electric. Almost every good realtor will tell you about this. And so what does that mean? You need water rights, which are essentially, it's again the municipality saying, hey, we're going to go put a hookup on your land, and you're able to tap into that to draw on water for your own land. Some people can do wells or drill their own, but of course there's always risk and extra investment brought in with that. And we wanted to also minimize the amount of like just tractors and traffic that we needed to create on the land. And so this seemed to be a good piece. So we found a good realtor, Costa Rica Real Estate Service, Keith Schenkel. So Keith was great. And again, I can put plugs for all these guys in our our episode, because they were great and very helpful along the way. So I'd definitely recommend their help. But Keith and I and Emily, my wife, we spent, I want to say, a couple hours on different video calls, just talking through, hey, what were the requirements? What were we sort of looking for? What do we want to do? Do we want something that was already developed? Do we want to buy a home? Do we want to build our own? And because we had a longer term plan and just vision, land and buying was really the priority for us. And so we've got time, but if you want to go quicker, short term, buy something that's already being developed and is in a development, there's those options too. It just depends kind of your flavor of life.
So you found the land. What happened next? You found it, you wanted to buy it. What did you do?
Yeah, so the land was owned by a foreigner, and so he had his own LLC and holding company. He actually had, what you'll see is people will go buy what they call madre fincas, and so they'll buy a large plot of land and sort of subdivide it, right? And so this is one of those off of the Costanera. And so we ended up talking to Keith and just put in basically the initial offer. So there's no, there's no holds barred on legally requiring at that stage, but it's just, hey, here's our offer letter of intent, and we want to go through the legal process of doing that. And so that I'd say is the longest process it took. We started this process in March, and we didn't finalize signing until basically the end of June. It was almost June 30th.
Wow. And why did it take so long, JP?
So you've got due diligence. Obviously, like your attorneys want to go through and make sure, are there particular types of easements on the property? We learned about the zona agricola, which is pretty common. But if you're buying like beach property, there's setbacks that are required from the land, from the ocean. It's the maritime sort of whatever they call it. But anyway, so the point is you got to do your due diligence, make sure that, hey, this land that's in the national registry is updated, the records are in order. The good thing I think about Costa Rica that people maybe don't realize, at least from the paperwork process, is that seems like with good attorneys, you've got the paperwork's in order and you're covered. So you just got to make sure you have folks who can understand what you're looking for, what you're trying to work through, and get you to sign off on that.
Yeah, I always like to separate concerns whenever I do one of these things, meaning that the realtor, the lawyer, the escrow, is always kind of, and the home inspection is kind of somewhat separate, just because, again, I mean, you do hear of the cases, it's less and less. I mean, if you're working with a reputable company, it probably won't work, but like anyone can really become a realtor here in Costa Rica. So I always suggest that people separate the concerns just so that, you know, you've got all this, you know, basically auditing going on of, you know, of each other. You don't need to do it, but it just always makes sense. But just to understand, so you put an offer, did that offer get accepted and then you moved to kind of like a sales purchase agreement where you had a certain number of days, or there was just an offer and then you did kind of all the due diligence and then close?
Yeah. Yeah, it was a little bit jumbled, but I think in traditional terms, what will happen is you get the offer letter of intent. The buyer issues that to the seller. And so I say, hey, I want to buy this property for, let's say, $100,000 or whatever it was. That's not what our property costs. It's just an example. And so, you know, you say, I want to buy this, and your realtor will pass that over to the seller. And so they'll evaluate and decide whether or not they want to accept that offer. Now, part of the reason that we moved pretty quickly was during COVID. And I think you know this from part of the reason you started the podcast, a lot of interest started coming into the country. And so we knew, hey, we may need to move quicker on a better parcel of land than we might have a year ago. And so that was part of our motivation. We didn't necessarily have everything in order back home. We just kind of, you know, I had to move some things around and make sure that we could buy the land effectively here at the end. But, you know, when a good offer comes up and you know you can do it, it's worth taking a serious look at. And so that's what happened was, put in the offer letter, got accepted, and then we went through the due diligence process with the attorneys. Not really much came up. There's a couple weird things, but they're more just nuances that you end up seeing, and you have to sign off and say, okay, is this something that I want with my land? Yes, no, and then make that determination of you as a buyer. Some of the things that I'm talking about are you know, ability to keep the land intact. So Costa Rica is very environmentally friendly, so you can't go and cut down trees and just you know, move everything around, nor would we want to. So it's really, I think it's about shaping the mindset of the buyer and making sure that I'm coming in here to buy land in Costa Rica, not imagine how I could do it in Canada or America or wherever else in the world.
So it sounds like, did you guys ever sign a sales purchase agreement where you went from offer, the offer was accepted, then you went through the due diligence and then you closed? Meaning there was no like legally binding, meaning that like, hey, we accept this if all due diligence works out, etc., and we're closing in 45 days.
We did do the sale purchase agreement. That was the part that, like I said, our attorneys already started the due diligence process kind of in the middle of it. And so that was, it was a letter of intent, sale purchase agreement, final signing day, end of June. So those 3 steps, more or less.
Okay. And you didn't really, did you use escrow? I mean, how did you go about the payment?
Yeah, that was and the market opportunity, right? The escrow company, it was a little bit, we didn't really have one at first, and somebody knew somebody, and so we're like, okay, let's just use this. They've done deals with them before. It wasn't very expensive. It was like $1,000, but they were just a little slow on moving.
Escrow is very affordable.
Yeah. And so we got that done. It was a US based escrow account. So that made things pretty easy. I was transferring money from a US bank to a US escrow. And then the buyer or the seller himself, he was an American. So it was just transfer of money that way. You know, so pretty easy.
Awesome. And then the signing, you had to physically be there, or your lawyers did it for you?
Yeah, we wanted to be there. That was part of the fun of it. And it was just, you know, afterwards, my wife and I took a bottle of champagne, popped it on the land. So it was just like a fun thing to, you know, kind of sign off. So we did the signing in Dominical at one of the breweries there.
No, well, great place to do it. Well, I mean, it sounds like how much do you think you spent in closing, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, in closing, so we had fees, about 1,000. It was probably 10 grand, like everything all in, if that. Just like different fees that came up from the attorneys, escrow, and then of course you have the realtor fees, and that was a portion of it. So it wasn't too much, 10, 12 grand, something like that. But just, I would say, I guess like my advice for somebody buying land, add like 10, 12% onto the purchase price just to estimate like, hey, here's about how much extra I have to pony up for finalizing the payment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was about to ask you what advice you give anyone to looking to buy real estate in Costa Rica, but maybe that's it. You know, just estimate the closing costs.
That's a good one. I think the other thing is just be open-minded. I see a lot of Facebook groups where people talk about, oh, you know, hey, does this look like this in the US, or can you do this in Costa Rica? And I think it's just keep in mind, you're going to a different country. You try to accept the customs that are going to be there. It's going to be different, and respect the place you're going to be in. So those for me are the most important things that I think we're becoming a more remote first kind of globalized world where people can really live in all these different places. Like, how can we adapt to the place we're in, less so than trying to make it what we're used to?
Why did you decide to put it in a company name and not in your own name?
Yeah, so my wife and I are equal partners there. We will, I think part of
Well,
the, yeah,
that kind of answers it, right?
yeah,
Your
they're,
wife and you are
yeah,
equal
equal
partners.
partners. So that's it. Yeah.
Well, also, I think from the point of view you mentioned there, I mean, you expect at some point to turn it into something that's going to be a commercial, making revenue, so that you want the corporation structure there, because the taxes. Actually, the tax is a little higher as a corporation, but again,
Yeah.
it's just you run a business in a corporation.
There's that. And then I think the key thing is like owning a bank account or opening a bank account and
Yep.
getting a car eventually. Those are easier done through some sort of corporate
Yep.
entity than an individual at the early stages.
Yeah, and I mean, again, if you want anything done, if you're up in the States and you need anything done here, you can just do a power of attorney for the lawyer to do something if necessary. But
Yeah.
well, I mean, what are your long-term plans with the place, if you don't mind me asking, JP?
No, this is great. I'm glad you are asking. So probably we're in year one right now, or year 0 to 1. So year one, I think we're gonna talk to engineers, designers. Your podcast has been a great resource of information.
Thank you.
So I plan on reaching out to a lot of those guys that I've seen on there and just collecting intel, right? That's what I want to do right now. Talk to a lot of different folks. Who do we want to work with? And then do the design ideation phase. And so we at least want to do like a site master plan of knowing what are the major structures we want to put on this property. We have about an acre build site that's pretty flat. So that's easy to build on. It's connectable through the road. So the Costanera is like the main principal highway that runs north and south down to Panama. And so we're 3 minutes off the Costanera highway. So it'll be pretty easy to get construction equipment and those types of things out there. Soil studies, all of that. I really want to get to know the land basically in year one. And then after that, with a little bit of savings and some design ideation, and I think putting up a principal structure, which is basically the vacation rental home / our home, 1,200, 1,500 square feet is what we're talking. So not huge again. And then some other ideas are starting to once we're down there more longer term, more frequently, being able to rent that out as a vacation rental. So whether it's Airbnb, VRBO, there's all these different sites. And I'll probably self-manage that at the early stages just to not worry about taking too much of a hit on margin. And of course, like connecting with folks down there, starting to build a team of who do I want to work with, who do I want to keep in my lawn, to keeping the grounds, to just keeping an eye on the property too. So finding like a property manager who's probably a local would be what I would want to go down that path, and just having fun with it. So that's what we're most excited about right now in the short term.
Well, my last question to you, sir, which is a question I love to ask anyone, but I think I may know the answer to it. If you inherited $500,000 and had to invest it into business or real estate down here in Costa Rica, what would you do with it and why?
Yeah, no, I think you're probably spot on. I'm fond of the Osa Peninsula. There's so many great properties or areas down there. They just are expensive. So Drake Bay has some wonderful views of the ocean. It's right there on the water. That's an amazing place. So $500,000 would go a long way there. And then one other idea I've had, I don't know if I told you this the first time we connected, but I'm very like environmentally conscious and care a lot about sustainability. And right now, I think you're just seeing all these stories come out in the news of what's happening in the West Coast here in the United States, these wildfires. Like really starting to think about, okay, how can we build things in a way that are more sustainable and protecting the environment? And the mangroves and the habitat are pretty close to where we live, about 20 minutes away. And there's all these ranchos over there that used to be cut down for grazing cattle and all that kind of thing. So I would love to, at some point, work with an organization. You've got Osa Conservation down there and some others to regrow some of those habitats and try to make sure that they rehabitate with the natural beauty that they once had. So I think Costa Rica is already moving in that direction, but I'd love to be part of that process.
Yeah, I mean, I was seeing something the other day where they were trying to pass a law about exploration of oil here, that basically they will never do it. That just Costa Rica just not, it has oil, it has natural resources. You can't mine here, you can't hunt, you can't, Costa Rica is basically trying to be, excuse the biblical use here, the Garden of Eden for the world. So, it's we can, that you always have kind of, I suppose you can always go to the Garden of Eden of Costa Rica. So. Yeah. Well, awesome, Jake. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, everybody we talk to is always like, wow, it's amazing, it's paradise. And yeah, they work hard to keep it that way. So that's part of it too.
They do. Well, JP, thanks again very much for your time. Anyone that wants to reach out to JP to discuss, I suppose, his story or get a bit more information from him, you can do. I'll put all of your contact details in the description. And I really appreciate it, Betty.
Thanks a lot, Richard. Yeah, I'd love to do a follow-up once we get a little bit further down the path.
Yeah, it would be great, man. You have a good day.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.